Hi there, welcome to Planet Zoo and the Every Animal franchise zoo. Things are progressing pretty well. We're almost about halfway done at this stage, but that means there's still loads of animals to cram into this zoo to achieve that ultimate objective of every single species in Planet Zoo in this one zoo. To be honest, I'm starting to realise how daunting the complexity of achieving this task is going to be, but still determined we're going to get there. We will definitely get there in the end. This week I've been adding some of the European animals for us to take a look at, but before we take a look at those, there are some general changes I've been making too. First up, it's the dreaded lemurs. This is no longer a walkthrough habitat because we can't have nice things apparently. The amount of stress notifications I was getting for the animals in here, it was ridiculous. So visitors in this zoo are no longer allowed to interact with the lemurs. I mean, look at this, dropping trash in the middle of the exhibit. I tried the signs, I tried putting janitors here, nothing worked. People have no respect apparently. So instead, the lemurs are now free to enjoy their space without the pesky guests getting in the way. Something else new, since the zoo has grown so much recently, I decided to put in the other entrance. I've got here a whole other entrance facility set up, nothing fancy, but this now means that some guests will spawn up here at this end of the zoo rather than right at the beginning and getting that crush that we've been experiencing sometimes with too many guests over there. In the middle is the actual entrance with 2 new guest spawners. I've gone with the general design we were using across the zoo for facilities, so it's this green wood sort of glass thing. Just a nice simple entrance really. Coming out of the entrance, I've taken opportunity to make a real picnic area. First time I've done one of these in the game since the update where you can actually use null paths. So a real usable picnic area, which is pretty cool. Of course, to encourage guests to use it, I've put in another refreshments area, so just a couple of the refreshment stalls here. And yeah, can't have refreshments without a toilet. They always need the toilet when they get a drink. To balance this building out, I've also added another gift shop on the other side. So just a memento and also another information stall, although it's not getting used right now. I've brightened the space up in here a little bit with some of my custom gift store stuff. Again, nothing groundbreaking here, just some shelving and stuff and the little t-shirt stands and things that it looks quite good when you look at it through the window, I will say. Anyway, that's the new entrance, so shall we look at what animals we're putting in today? We're up to end of the E's, so that means it's all the animals with Eurasian or Europe in their title. Coming first is the Eurasian Lynx. Only 2 lynx in the social group and they can't share their habitat with anything else, so don't need a big space for this. Now, my plan is, where we left off last week and we put in the tropical house and some of the amenities up here, there's a big space back here now that I could utilise for putting in most of the European animals. Yeah, I think that'll work. So here we go, European lynx habitat. The lynx, this is a very shy animal living across the wilderness of Europe, so I've got to be really careful with this habitat to make sure that the animals are definitely going to be comfortable in their surroundings. That means I've got to be careful with the fencing, make sure that the guests aren't going to be too distracting for them. So that kind of means making sure that the lynxes aren't getting right up next to the fence line. To compensate for this, I'm heightening the terrain quite a bit and there'll be points along here that we're going to put some of the enrichment items and stuff to encourage the lynxes to go up there. That'll mean that even though the lynxes aren't going right up to the barrier, the guests are still going to get a good view if they are using the terrain. In terms of space, the lynxes don't need a huge amount of space, but they do need a lot of traversable terrain, and I know as soon as I start messing with the terrain, anything that they can't traverse, that ends up as negative space that can't be used, and it affects the overall terrain requirements. So at the back here, I'm building, well, what is essentially a big shed. This is a big empty space at the back of the habitat and that's going to fill up their space requirements so that there should be no complaints about them not having enough room. This then gives a little more flexibility and freedom to build a bit more extensively in the front bit of the habitat, which is kind of like the presentation area for the lynxes. The guest barrier for this habitat, I've gone with a natural wood look for most of it, so I've been using logs, the natural wood mesh panel and some of the different wood pieces here as well. For the outside part of the habitat, I've got an additional hard shelter out here. This is a blueprint that I created about a year ago for some of the cats in the game. I've put this in because even though we've got that big shed at the back, I don't want the lynxes to spend all their time back there. The guests aren't going to get a great view of the shed, although there is a secret viewing window for that as well. But what I'm trying to get them to do is to spend all of their time outside where all of the enrichment items are going to be. And we've got this little shed in that I'm going to put some bedding in there so to see if they'll sleep out here as well. In terms of terrain, I've got a lot of rock work in here. I'm going with an idea that this is supposedly on, I'd say, on the edge of a woodland that's bordering on, say, we're going into a mountainous area. I feel like that might be where the lynxes might hang out in real life. Ultimately, this all comes together when we get to the point of adding the trees and the plants in here. Planet Zoo has some fantastic temperate and taiga style trees for Asia and Europe in the game. So personally, I always enjoy this point where I get to add a load of trees and make it look like a proper woodland. Adding the final touches for this with all the plants and the enrichment items. When I tested it out with the animals, it worked great. It's always nice when a plan comes together. So all that open space with the big shed at the back, it meant that I could just go to town at the front with the plants and stuff, and they weren't bothered one bit about that. The only issue with this habitat that I'd completely forgotten about when I got to building the front of it was the fact that the animals are very shy and the mesh panel fencing at the front, not going to work. I didn't really want to go back and change the aesthetic that I'd gone for with the fencing, so I ended up putting some one-way glass behind that. It does look a bit out of place, but I'd rather that than take all the mesh paneling down instead. Anyway, here's the finished result. Eurasian wilderness habitat that should please both the animals and the guests as well. Hopefully. Not being many guests over at this point, so I can't tell yet whether they've got great views or not. Looks like they shouldn't have any problems from this angle at least. If we go inside, yeah, so far I haven't had any problems with the Eurasian lynxes hiding way out in the back yet. They are indeed in the habitat at the front like we planned. There they go, in unison. Must have a plan. Oh, there we go. Let's see them climb a tree. Wow, they really get up there, don't they? So isn't that lovely? Have a nice sit off in the branches there, why don't you? Can see half of the zoo from here. Haven't seen them using the outside bedding yet, but I'm confident that they will prefer to sleep out here than in the big shed, which we'll take a glance at just to show you it's there. Big empty space in here just to get the space requirements up. What I've added for this though, there is a secret viewing area here because it's so close to the tropical house next door and the pathing is so close. I just know some of the guests are going to be stood on this path trying to look at the lynxes, so they can see in if they really need to there. That's the lynxes done, so let's move on to the next animal. European badger, another shy animal, only lives in pairs and can't be housed with anything else. So I reckon we're going to put these right next door and utilise some of the fencing and stuff from the Eurasian lynx habitat here. For the badgers, I feel like this is something that's really close to home for me because we get loads of badgers in the UK in certain areas in the countryside. I remember like years and years ago, I stayed at one of those forest parks that you get in the UK. And it was nifty actually. On the TV they had a channel that was dedicated to like a badger camera, and it was set up right outside of where they were nesting in their set. We watched that channel for hours over the course of the 4 days that we were there. Never once saw a badger, but that definitely gave me an impression of what maybe a badger habitat should look like. So what I'm doing with this habitat is recreating kind of what I saw when I was looking at that camera for so long. Like with the Eurasian lynx habitat, there is going to be a bit of a backstage area for this habitat as well. This time it isn't so much about the fact that the badgers need a lot of space. They really don't. The habitat is quite small for the badgers. But the problem I have with it is that it's quite an awkward shape where I've put this in at the side. So rather than try and squeeze something into this corner, I figured I'd just expand the space out for the badger habitat. And that does give me some more flexibility to fill the front of the space up with more trees and fauna and stuff. Real life badger sets are normally under quite heavy undergrowth in forests and stuff. So I wanted at least to have a nod towards that at the back here. So there's going to be a lot of temperate plants and bushes built up at the backside of this fence panel. What you might notice with the habitat, now I know in game they have the underground burrow, which animals like the badger can use. It's a wonderful feature and I like using that for habitats that I build in creative mode zoos. But now this, I already know it's going to be a problem for a franchise mode zoo. Obviously in game there's a nifty feature where they've got the camera set up which lets you see what's inside the underground burrow, but honestly how many times does that fail and the TV screen goes off and the guests then complain about not being able to see anything because the animals are underground? We're already currently losing money in this zoo because I've restricted the number of guests to help the FPS a little bit, and there's not enough guests coming through to fund all the stuff we're doing in the zoo. I definitely don't want to make that worse than it already is, so no underground burrows for our animals, unfortunately. Let's have a look around the finished habitat. So guests can view this from two sides. Over this side we've got the little shed here, a little brick house for them with the above ground sleeping that they do use. To the side of this is the, well, I suppose you could call it the front end garden. This is where I want the badgers to be most of the time so that guests can see them. There's one now, going for the sprinkler. Ah. Considering how they're shy animals, they probably are going to be quite popular because they're one of the cuter animals in the game. Very playful and stuff. But yeah, just like with the lynx, I've had to go for the one-way glass here because they will get terrified of the guests peering at them like that. The back bit of planting here, this is where I will put the underground burrow if I was putting one in. I do feel a little bad, really. I mean, it's not the badger's fault, is it, that they decide to spend so much time under there and then guests complain that they can't see anything. Hey ho, it is what it is. So behind the habitat, yes, I do have this big open space, and fingers crossed the badgers don't spend too much time back here. I mean, there's so much going on at the front that it shouldn't really bother them to have this at the back. Honestly, I've really just got into the swing of having the backstage bit so that you've got a bit more leeway up front. I think it's for the greater good of the habitat's end of the day, isn't it? Anyway, that is the badgers in, and yeah, that's one more species down, so some more to go today, I think. Shall we take a look? What have we got next? European fallow deer. Finally, this episode's an animal with interspecies enrichment, so we get to put the red deer in this habitat as well. In terms of where I'm putting the deer, I already marked out a space for them, right in front of the tropical house. I did some planning for this to see if it would fit in, and indeed, with the minimum numbers that we need for the social group, they will fit in this corner. So let's get on with the build for that. Fallow deer and red deer are again some species that we're very familiar with in the UK. You'll find them in loads of the zoos over here and sometimes in country estates and things like that. So for this build, I'm going really basic on this one. I think recently some of the habitats I've been building up have been quite intensive. So instead of going for something quite complex again, I've gone for a time saver basically. I'm making a sort of, well, it's not a petting zoo, but it kind of looks like a petting zoo. The most time with this habitat was spent on the shed, which is the hard shelter. So yeah, most focus for the build is on the shed, and it's gonna have like different sleeping quarters and a place where the outside tap's gonna go and stuff. Real life deer, you'll find that they spend a lot of their time trekking across like open countryside and stuff, foraging for food and things. Maybe a little bit of woodland thrown in there, but I wouldn't want to go too heavy on stuff like rock work. I wanted it to look like an open field kind of feel. So really quite a nice, easy habitat that I didn't have to spend half a weekend creating this one, which was good. For the fencing, I've basically stolen the fencing that I created for the camel and the Przewalski's horse enclosure that we made maybe about a month and a half ago. For the deer, I'm comfortable having an open fence because the deer don't have a great leap on them. They're not going to get over the fencing, and I don't feel too uncomfortable putting the guests right up close to the animals. They're not exactly confident with humans, but they're not shy of them either. I think they're indifferent, both species, so fingers crossed we won't have any problems about having this so open. So this is my completed open field type habitat for the fallow deer and the red deer. There's 6 deer in total in here to meet the social groups, so I'm hoping there's not going to be tons and tons of babies, otherwise the space might become an issue. So far this hasn't been open very long and it's already proving quite popular, so again I'm kind of worried that if there's going to be too many guests around they might start complaining that they're stressed out or something. Hopefully not. Good thing is that the pathing goes right around this enclosure, so there's plenty of spaces for guests to spread out a little bit. Hopefully they do. If not, we can rethink these kind of habitats in future. I do think though, with the hard shelter being quite big in here, there's enough space for them to go and hide in there if they need to. I have put one-way glass on the inside of the hard shelter just in case that is an issue. Saying that, guests are spread out enough now because they're coming from the 2 different entrances that I've got that the crowd shouldn't build up too badly anyway. Anywho, I guess we'll see. That's now 2 more species in, so I think we've got time for a couple more in this episode. I'm really trying to power through as many of these animals as quickly as possible before we lose steam. Next is the Fennec Fox, so we're back to Africa. Don't really want them to go over this corner of the zoo, so where are we going to go? How about we put these somewhere near that new entrance that we've created? We do have some African animals already over here. If we use a similar theme, we could put them on this corner here. Try and make something that fits in with the other enclosures that are around here as well. Yeah, I think we can do this. This spot on the corner maybe. So Fennec Fox, a very tiny animal in Planet Zoo. Great species to build for. Given their size, you definitely don't need a lot of room for this one. I believe for the Fennec Fox, they can have a walk-through enclosure. But honestly, what is the point? They're very shy animals, and what would be the point of building a walk-through enclosure when they're going to have big problems with humans walking through it? So we're definitely not going down that route with this one. To this end, this enclosure is about half of the space is indoor and half of the space is outdoor space. The indoor building for this, I've loosely based this on the renovated aardvark and meerkat enclosure that I created last week. For the outside bit, I've borrowed the fencing that I created for the combined habitat that has the plain zebra and the warthogs in it. Being mindful that this is a lot of indoor space, I've made sure that there's viewing areas right the way across where the guests are going to walk by. The Fennec Foxes are a little bit squirrely and I'm anticipating that they're going to be all over the place in here. They won't stick to the outside bits, they're going to be running all over the place. Very much like the Arctic foxes in that way. I imagine in real life that the Fennec Fox probably likes a lot of undergrowth to hide in and to hunt from. But in the game, they don't really like a lot of this, probably because their habitat is so small to begin with. So in terms of flora and fauna, I've gone quite low on this. I've added rockwork and got all of the enrichment items outside, aside from the drinking water that's gone inside. To have the water outside would have meant the landscape would have had to stay flat, because as soon as I put that water pipe down, it would flatten the land anyway. So let's take a look. I'm sure I've been saying this all episode, but this is another one that was really a pleasure to build. This is definitely one of the rare occasions where a small animal in Planet Zoo, this feels like about the right size for an enclosure for them. Planet Zoo sometimes definitely feels like it's trying to create too much room for each of the species, but for the Fennec Fox, I would say this feels about the right size. The inside of the enclosure probably does feel a little bit bare in here. Probably could have added more rocks or something. But the age-old issue, if I started adding rocks in here, then that would interfere with the terrain in here and make more non-navigable land. I can live with it so I don't have to increase the space on the outside. It feels like just enough space out here for the Fennec Fox to enjoy it. Hey, and we've already got people taking a look. Yeah, Fennec Foxes running around as energetically as they do. I'm not worried about the guest not being able to see them at any point while they're stood there. Just hoping the one-way glass is good enough because, yeah, this seems like it's going to be a really popular habitat. The foxes being able to get right up to the barrier there, yeah, might freak them out a little bit. We'll have to wait and see. Oh, jeez. I know I said you could get close, but You might need your glasses checking if you need to get that close to the side to read it. I don't know. Sometimes the guests are really funny to watch like that. They just do silly things, don't they? Hey, I guess I'm just glad they're enjoying the new enclosure so much. It's a sad day sometimes when you put one in and nobody likes it at all. Nobody wants to go visit. That does happen sometimes. Sometimes some animals just aren't as popular as the other ones. Right, I would say that is all we need to see of the Fennec Fox for now. And there is something else I have to show you. If we make our way back to the European animals, I've sneaked in a little build for the fire salamander here. Fire salamander is a European species and it was up next in the list. So I figured it'd be nice to squeeze these little guys in before we finish off. Now, we play the game of find the exhibit animal again. Unless they're a really big one, they're like always hiding in the boxes. So yeah, check all the corners. Are you over this side? No. Oh, honestly, right. Fine. So we'll do it the hard way, shall we? Right, click on the box and the animal, and that should give us an indication of where you're hiding. Let's see. Oh, I think I see an outline. Oh, naughty salamander hiding on the 3D wall, eh? I wouldn't in a million years even think to look at the face here for these things. I thought they would always be in the centre or something. Anyway, there we go, little salamander there. The building that I'm keeping these in, I've custom made this. It's, well, another kind of shed, I guess. There's a few other features. I've put in a coffee vending machine. And of course, wherever we've got a rest stop, we always have a toilet. So I've squeezed in a toilet behind that door. Also one of the rare times I've actually got creative, and there's a little bit of a backstage area at the side here. So with addition of the salamander, that takes us to 80 animals in total in the zoo. That means we're officially over halfway. Halfway there. So definitely, those still watching the series, big thank you to you guys for sticking with it. This is very much a long haul series, isn't it? Onwards and upwards to the finish line. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.